So one of the most exciting experiences that I've had within the hair transplant world and hair transplant industry, learning more and more about it all the time, is that I actually got to watch both an FUE and FUT procedure being done on other people in person, in the room. And it's pretty amazing to watch the way that entire thing happens. If you ever have the chance, I highly suggest it if you're like me. If you're not like me, you'll just be bored out of your mind. But I found it super interesting. And the FUE procedure that I watched done was on a black guy, an African-American basketball player. This was a very special case because this guy didn't actually need a hair transplant. He had basically all of his hair. He just had this tiny, tiny little scar on the side of his head that he'd had since he was a kid when he fell over or something, and it just was a small little scar. So he only needed about 50 grafts to fill that in. And so Dr. McGrath, my former surgeon, he decided to do this hair transplant. And I watched in the room him extracting all of those grafts by hand. And I could tell he was having a very hard time doing it. This is a surgeon, Dr. McGrath, who's been doing hair transplants for 16 years and has been doing FUE almost daily for 6 years now. And still, those microscopes on, extracting everyone by hand, I could tell that he was not only an expert, but just having an incredibly difficult time. And so afterwards, we discussed that. And I asked him, what's this like on black patients? I mean, obviously, extracting a graft is not usually that difficult. So he explained as to why it's so difficult to do FUE on African Americans. And other than this case where he was just extracting and transplanting 50 grafts, he does not do FUE hair transplants on black guys.
The FUE procedure, which we already talked about, is a unique and good procedure for the right candidate. It should not be performed on African American patients. Well, you might say, well, I have a friend down the street that did it and he's very happy with it. Well, we want to talk about the numbers. We want to talk about the large population. The African American hair that kinks and curls on the outside of the scalp. Guess what? Kinks and curls on the inside of the scalp. The right way to do this procedure is in a linear fashion where you can remove all that hair with the sebaceous gland underneath it, turn it on its side, and under high magnification, you need a very experienced staff that can go in and around those kinks and curls, keeping all the supportive tissue intact. When you go in with a drill punch, trying to figure out the angle and direction of even a Caucasian for that matter, good luck with trying to do that on an African American patient. That's where Dr. McGrath had a rough time, as would all great surgeons, because the hair is kinking and curling and turning and entwining, and you need to use a larger punch, and it's just very difficult to do.
No one has X-ray vision, right?
No one has X-ray vision, exactly. What does that mean? Well, David discussed what he saw, which was interesting, and to his surprise, it was like, wow, I thought FUE was just popping him out, and he saw that here you got a surgeon with a ton of experience that's challenged by removing maybe 50 different hair follicles. Could you imagine, God forbid, a doctor that's a beginner, or maybe does this part-time, or maybe bought a machine and says, hey, I'm a hair transplant doctor, and in walks a bald African-American that says, hey, I've done my research, I'm ready to go. And now this guy's gonna pull 3,000 grafts out of the back of the head? That's a bad risk reward. I don't like to use scare tactics. It's not my style. I mean, I'm not that person, but when it comes to a certain type of condition that can happen, when you go into the back of an African American scalp with an FUE punch, you can transect the follicle inside the scalp. When that happens, the hair will grow through the skin, a lot like getting an ingrown hair in your beard. Could you imagine that in the back of the head, maybe happening 40, 60, 160 times? That's not going to be nice. That's going to be nasty. It's a medical condition that can cause serious damage to the patient. So we're talking about the risk reward.
What do they call that when you get all those ingrown hairs?
If you want to Google it, it's folliculitis barbae, and it will literally scare the pants off you. I mean, it will look like cauliflower in the back of your head. Now, a lot of these FUE guys that are selling it to everybody and doing it to everybody are going to say, come on, man, that guy, yeah, that might happen 1 in 100 times. That's simply not true.
Yeah, and 1 in 100 isn't.
1 in 100.
That's very good. I wouldn't want to pull the trigger on 1 in 100.
You are going to sign a disclosure as an African American patient having a large FUE procedure that this could be a possibility and this could happen. So just keep in mind, we don't want to take, your fantasy away. We don't want to burst anybody's bubble. We want you to be happy with your hair. And I say this, like I say to all my African-American patients, I say, look, let's talk about this. Let's make a decision, okay? The better procedure is to do it in a linear fashion, but you know what, kid? You got to promise me you're not going to come back in here in 8 months with a shaved head and say, hey, I got a line. So with the black man's head and, when it's shaved and the way guys are wearing their hair or wearing their head, whatever, you need to really think long and hard about if a hair transplant is going to be for you. Yeah. And we're here to tell you that it may not be a good idea. As a matter of fact, I don't think it's a good idea at all to consider a FUE procedure if you're African American.
And most top surgeons who do FUE don't even do them on African Americans.
And that's what scares me, because there's a couple doctors out there, I never name names, never name clinics, that will bring you in and say, oh man, you know what? The reason that they made that video, they just don't know the best. They don't know. Well, okay, then that's Superman. I want to meet that guy because he's got X-ray vision and he can see all those kinks and curls inside, and he's never going to transect the follicle. That's just not possible. When the science doesn't add up, that's when I have a problem.